Well, here we are, July 2nd, 2023. I'm Larissa, and we're at one of Gallery Studio, my gallery, my new gallery in Saratoga, and I am reading my new novel, When It Becomes Too Much, by me. When It Becomes Too Much, Chapter 9, A Lot of Pink. Brian drove Ruth home in silence. It wasn't angry silence. It was a contemplative and mutual silence. Don't call me tonight. Just let me talk to my mom, and I'll call you in the morning, Brian said as he pulled up to Ruth's townhouse. That's a good plan. And hey, what? Brian asked. Suddenly they were both very tired, and he still had pizza and salad to pick up. I love you. Like family, like a brother. I love your mom, too. Yeah, I know. Me too. Talk to you tomorrow. Don't you call or text me either, okay? I want to really sleep on this. It's a bigger risk for me than you. I don't know Sydney. Yeah, I know. See you tomorrow. Bye. Ruth closed the door and walked up the steps of her stoop. Some mail stuck out of the mail slot on the door. There was a needle in the corner where Gregory had been. It wasn't uncommon anymore around here to see that. Ruth smiled to herself, thinking about Sydney's pink apartment flat as she opened the door. That was the most pink Ruth had ever seen together in one place. It was almost too much. She would have never guessed. Ruth's townhouse seemed Ruth's townhouse seemed boring and tiresome now. The needle next to the stoop felt twice as disgusting as it normally would have. Her kitchen looked dark and dingy now. It was only 6, but Ruth felt exhausted. All the emotions of the past few days had been a lot. Too much. She found herself feeling weak. She wasn't sure she could even make it up the stairs. Dropping her bag absently on the floor next to the rocking chair, she shuffled to the kitchen. A glass of wine would taste good right now, and there was still rosé in the refrigerator. She found the rosé and poured half of what was left into a large crystal glass, then kicked off her shoes and walked barefoot back into the living room. The mail was now all over the floor. Ruth left her glass on the coffee table and bent to scoop up the mail, a credit card statement, newspaper grocery ads, an insurance advertisement, and a letter-size envelope hand-addressed from Tom at the office. She put the other items down and flopped on the couch, opening the letter from Tom. It was a typed letter on company letterhead that with his blue ink signature on the bottom. It was official. The RE line said, status of employment, Ruth Ellen Dober. The letter explained that because Ruth neither showed up for work the day after the party, nor did she call, the company considered her actions as a resignation. Her employment was never terminated. Tom had even called to invite her back, and since she resigned, she wasn't fired. She was not eligible to apply for unemployment. Ruth tossed the letter on the floor and grabbed for her glass of wine. She took a sip and sucked on her bottom lip. She wasn't expecting to qualify for unemployment, but the letter was a bit upsetting anyway. It was like Tom wanted to rub it in her face. She knew that wasn't the case. She knew it was just a legality, but still. She was human and had feelings. Drinking her wine, she wanted a cigarette, but she decided she wasn't going to give in, especially after reading the letter. Ruth didn't have room in her budget for cigarettes. Ruth piled up the throw pillows on the side of the couch and leaned back with her feet on the opposite armrest so she could recline while drinking her wine and thinking about the day. She took a sip and looked again at the letter on the floor. She decided she didn't care what Brian and his mom did. She still had Sydney's number on her phone. She was going to take it. The garden was huge, and it was only one of 4 that existed on the grounds. If Sydney was open, they could easily start some type of homesteading business. It wasn't like it was something foreign to Ruth. Her grandma's garden had been so prolific the summer she stayed with her grandma that she and her cousins sold the extra produce door to door. There were a lot of neglected fruit trees. It wouldn't take much to get them back in order, and then they could sell the fruit or even make preserves and sell those. Ruth knew how to do all these things because of her grandma and the summers she spent with her as a child. Ruth finished her wine and was feeling alert and strong. She got up and grabbed the phone from the island and scrolled through the calls from the past few days. She found Sydney's number. It was only 7:30. That shouldn't be too late to call. It didn't matter what Brian was going to say in the morning. Ruth redialed Sydney. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello? Ruth recognized Sydney's voice. Hi, Sydney. It's Ruth from earlier today. Hi, Ruth. Have you and Brian and Patty talked things over? That's why I'm calling. I have no idea how things went with Brian and Patty, but I know I'm interested. Oh. Sydney sounded surprised. Yeah, it's the garden. You were just talking about that one plot, but there are 3 others I saw too. Yeah, there are. I didn't want to scare you with them though. It's so much work. It is a lot of work, but with that much space, we could grow what we needed plus have stuff to sell. Ruth, that's exactly what I've been thinking too. I didn't say anything earlier, but me, you, and Brian could have a little family business. I don't know what your situation is, or even Brian's situation for that matter, but I think it could be great. I just didn't want to scare you off earlier with all that. Sydney sounded like she might cry. Tears were already formed in Ruth's eyes. I don't know where to start, Ruth sobbed into the phone, then told her new friend about the past few days and the strange feeling that had been growing in her stomach. She told her about the attack, about Patty and Brian fighting, about Gregory, about her family. And Sydney told her all about Melvin's cancer and how it was when she lost her mom and how her boyfriend Bill would probably be moving in with her soon. They'd been dating for 5 years now and had talked about marriage, but it seemed unnecessary. The 2 women talked like long-lost sisters. It was natural and easy, and they had a lot of the same goals and interests, things that Ruth did not have in common with Brian. Okay, so where do we go from here? Ruth said to Sydney. The floor is ready for you to move in whenever you want. The cleaners finished everything yesterday morning. Of course, you would need to clean for yourself in the future unless you pay someone. No, I do my own cleaning, Ruth said. I do mine too, but I've been paying a service to keep the rest in shape. It's a lot for one person, and between my work and Dad and the property, it's been too much for me. I've been going crazy, Sydney admitted. I know the feeling. What's your work? Ruth asked. She was wondering how Sydney paid for things, but didn't know how to bring it up without sounding rude. Oh, I'm a CPA in private practice. I work from the house. I only take clients I want to take, and I make my own schedule. I only really work part-time, unless you count the IHSS hours for Dad. Even now that he's in hospice, I still get 8 hours a week for doing his laundry and taxes and stuff. It was more when he was still at the house. That explained it. This really had potential. So what does Bill think of all the pink? Ruth dared to ask. Sydney laughed. He hates it. He said if he moves in, he gets to add other colors in the living room, and the 2nd bedroom suite is his to redecorate how he wants. It's the only reason he doesn't live with me already. Ruth wasn't surprised, and since Sydney didn't need anyone to help her pay bills, she really had no reason to compromise. So yeah, if you want, you can start bringing things over tomorrow and we can shake on it. Ruth wasn't sure if she was ready to start taking things over, but who knew what the morning would bring when Brian called. Okay, I'm not sure I'll be ready to start bringing things over tomorrow, but I can stop by again tomorrow and get a key and sign anything you need me to sign, Ruth said cheerfully. Sounds good. I'll see you tomorrow whenever you're here. I'm going to see my dad around lunch, but I'll be back for the rest of the day, probably by 2 or 3. I'll call and check before I head over. See you tomorrow, Ruth said. See you tomorrow, bye. Sydney hung up. Ruth flopped back on the couch and fell asleep in her dress. When Brian walked in at 7 with the pizza and salad, Patty was hangry. Well, took you long enough, she said. Brian wasn't amused that she was so cranky. You're welcome, was all he said, tossing the pizza and salad on the table. He went directly to his bedroom and put his bag away. Then he grabbed some sweats and a t-shirt and went to the bathroom to freshen up and get comfortable. When he came out of the bathroom, face washed and in his PJs, Patty was stuffing a piece of pizza in her face. Brian stuck his tongue out at her as he passed her on his way to the kitchen to get a plate. He sat at the table across from her and put 3 slices on his plate and took a bite. After he finished his first slice, he began talking. So, Sydney isn't so bad. She's actually a really nice person, Brian said. Yeah? Anyone offering you free rent would seem nice to you. Right now, Patty said, reaching for another slice herself. No, really. You were right. She's a grown-up now, and the house is almost exactly like I remember it. It's in great shape, Mom. And the downstairs master apartment is amazing. You're going to love it. Oh, am I? I don't remember saying I was going to go. Why wouldn't you? Seriously, the place is amazing. There's a beautiful handrail along the walls in your apartment, so you'll never need me to help you. And there are no stairs you will have to navigate. There are ramps everywhere. There's even a ramp into the pool just outside your sliding glass door. Really? Just outside my sliding glass door? Patty was mocking Brian, and he wasn't happy. Yes, I have photos, Mom. A lot of good that's going to do. I can call Janie and ask her to come look at them and tell you. Don't you dare call Janie. Are you sure you really want to do this? This is the total other side of the county. You and Ruth will need to find new hangouts. Patty was going to give in. She just wanted to make Brian squirm some. I will call Janie if you're going to be so pig-headed. And who cares about anything over here? It's not like we're big clubbers or anything. I'm sure there's a good diner somewhere over there, and Ruth and I are starting our own business. Patty raised her eyebrows. Are you now? And just what business is that? None of yours. Now, are you going to do this or not? Because I just might go without you, and then you'll need to find a new IHS person because I'm not driving back over here every day to get you pizza. Brian surprised Patty with his response. She wasn't expecting him to be willing to go without her. Fine, tell Sydney we'll do it, Patty finally said. Brian was pleased with himself. His mom looked defeated for once, and he was getting everything he wanted for a change. Brian reached for the salad and tossed it with the dressing. You want some salad, he asked Patty. Yeah, put it on the same plate here, please. Brian leaned over his mom while he put the salad on her plate. Sydney is still into everything pink, and all I'll say is her floor is a lot of pink. Patty laughed. Some things never change, I guess. That's probably why she's not married yet either. Or is she gay too? Brian chuckled. No. She said she has a boyfriend. Oh, so there's still hope for Melvin to be a grandfather. The way Sydney was talking, I don't think he'll be alive another 9 days, let alone another 9 months. And that would mean she would have to get pregnant tonight. So no, Melvin has no hope. I was thinking I might go see Melvin tomorrow. You want to go with me? And do what? Gloat over moving into his house? Sydney told me the story. He demanded she offer the house to you. Absolutely demanded, Mom. What happened between you two? Patty sighed and shrugged her shoulders. I guess I can tell you now. Your father's dead and you're old enough. Besides, your sister learned years ago, and if anyone was going to be mad, it was going to be her, and she's not, so... So what? What have you been keeping from me? Brian screamed, suddenly enraged. He slapped his hand on the table. Don't you yell at me. I was going to tell you, Patty said, taking a bite of her salad and chewing it thoroughly. You better, Brian said, tearing at another slice of pizza. Your older sister, Dana? What about Dana? She's only your half-sister. She's also your half-cousin. Melvin is her biological father. What? How long have you known? Why didn't you tell me? Did Dad know? Patty sighed deeply and spoke slowly. Brian had a right to be mad, but not at her, at his Uncle Melvin. I always knew. Your father drove a truck for a couple of years when we were first married, and we lived on the second floor of the house. You lived in the house too? You never told me that. No one did. Yeah, well, it wasn't a great experience, Bry Guy. Your dad was on the road, and your Uncle Melvin got drunk one night, and 9 months later, your sister was born. When your dad got home, no one told him what happened right away. I only finally told him when I turned up pregnant. Melvin took advantage of me. He assaulted me. He lied to me and said he needed help with the horses and raped me in the barn. When I told your dad, he beat the shit out of Melvin, and we moved out. That's why I've never been alone with Melvin since. Patty was crying silently. Brian wasn't sure she knew she was crying. The big fat tears just rolled down her cheeks and chin. He looked at his mother now, considering what she just told him. He was starting to understand things. Things were falling into place. One of your aunts told Dana at your dad's funeral. I wasn't even the one who told her, Patty said quietly now. Brian got up and hugged his mother from the side. Mom, I had no idea. I won't go see him tomorrow. No, you should go see him one last time. Moving into the house is going to be helpful for all of us, Sydney included. I don't think you understand just how lonely that girl's life has been. I'm glad to hear she has a boyfriend. Brian sat back down and continued to pick at his dinner. Patty was quiet. So I will tell Sydney tomorrow we're moving in. Yes, you could call her now. No, Ruth and I both said we wanted to sleep on things. Was that Ruth's idea? Yeah. You don't know how lucky you are to have Ruth in your life. I really don't know why she wastes so much of her time with you. She's attractive and still fairly young. She should be dating. Mom, please don't start right now. And when we are all living in that house, I don't want to hear about it either. Just give it a rest, okay? Patty pushed herself away from the table and went back to her bedroom, leaving Brian alone with the rest of the pizza. Chapter 10. A lot of baggage. Ruth woke to the phone ringing in her purse. She was still on the couch in her dress from the day before. The clock on the wall above her said 7:30. There was a mouthful of wine left in the glass on the coffee table. She sat up and reached forward for the bag. She could just reach the side. She pinched at the fabric and tugged the enormous bag towards her. It jerked in her direction, and items spilled out on the floor. The cell phone slid under the couch. She scrambled to grab it. It was Brian. Ruth answered the phone, out of breath. "Morning," she said. "I almost hung up. I fell asleep on the couch last night. My phone was in my bag. You woke me up. I didn't know where I was for a second." "Oh, well, Patty's on board and so am I. What's your story?" Ruth laughed nervously. Brian was going to be mad she didn't wait. "I kind of called Sydney last night and accepted," Ruth offered like it was a Jeopardy answer. "What? What if I called you this morning and said I wasn't going?" Brian sounded hurt, not angry. "I was going to go anyway. I don't have any other options right now, Brian. I got a letter from the office yesterday telling me I'm not even eligible for unemployment because I technically quit. I wasn't fired. I can't pay my rent here. I need to move in with Sydney." Brian hadn't realized the position his friend was in and calmed down. Now he felt even worse for having picked on her about smoking. "Oh, I didn't realize, Ruth." "I know, because you don't pay attention to anyone but yourself." Ruth surprised herself with her blunt honesty. This is normally something she would have kept to herself, but the truth was she was a little angry with Brian right now. "Everyone has a life, Brian. That includes me, and I've been having a hard one for a while now. You've got it pretty easy considering." Ruth was right. Brian did have things pretty easy considering. "I'm sorry." Ruth was surprised. She had never heard Brian apologize seriously for anything. This was a first. "You're right. I've been far too selfish. I'm going to call Sydney now. Should I come over later?" Ruth was quiet for a moment before she answered. "Sydney said to come over anytime after 3 and I could get a key." Do you want me to go with you? I can drive," Brian offered. "If you want to go with me, you can, but I kind of wanted to drive myself. You can ride with me." Now Brian was quiet for a moment. How about we meet there? I was going to go visit my Uncle Melvin first. I was going to ask you to go with me, but after what my mom told me last night, it's not really important for you to meet the man." "Okay." Ruth was relieved. She was curious what Brian meant, but she didn't pry. Besides, she wasn't fond of hospice places, and she wasn't really interested in meeting Melvin. Given the fact that she had never met him before and the condition he was currently in, she felt it would only be voyeuristic for her to visit him now. "What did Sydney say when you called?" "Oh, all kinds of stuff. We talked for over 2 hours," Ruth said a little too cheerily for Brian. 2 hours? What could you possibly have had to talk about for 2 hours? Brian sounded jealous. It made Ruth feel good to make Brian jealous. "Just stuff. Girl stuff. None of your beeswax. Ask her yourself when you see her. Oh, and if you didn't get a letter from the office, you should probably look into applying for unemployment. You only have a certain amount of time to file after you get fired." Between girl stuff and fired, Ruth was aware that she was rubbing salt in the wound. You just remember Sydney's my cousin," Brian threatened. "How could I forget? And you just remember all the stuff you've said about her to me," Ruth threatened right back. Brian was stunned. He didn't know what to say. Ruth was amused. "Look, we've been friends for a long time. Don't worry, your secret's safe with me, Brian. Now, I'm going to get in the shower. I'll see you later at the house." "Okay, see you later. And hey, Ruth." "What, Brian?" "I love you." "I love you too." Ruth hung up first. While Brian was feeling deflated, Ruth was feeling strong and confident. She hadn't realized just how frustrated she had been in her friendship with Brian until this moment. She hoped the move was going to go smoothly. While it felt satisfying to make Brian jealous, it was also a little scary. Ruth was surprised how quickly the jealousy had crept into his voice. Ruth stood up and steadied herself. She didn't eat anything the night before. She only had that big glass of wine. The only thing she had eaten in the past 24 hours was a grilled chicken sandwich. She hadn't even eaten the fruit. The fruit looked suspicious to Ruth, so she left it on the plate. She was a little dizzy, but it passed, and she made her way to the half bath through the kitchen. Then she put on a pot of coffee and opened the refrigerator. There wasn't much in the fridge that was breakfast worthy. She opened the freezer. There was an old box of frozen toaster waffles. She grabbed the box. There were 2 small freezer-burned waffles left in the box. They would work for now. Ruth put the sorry-looking waffles in the toaster oven and poured herself a cup of coffee. When the waffles were done, she spread peanut butter on one and jelly on the other and made a sandwich. She wrapped it in paper towel and took it with her coffee out on the back patio. There was half a cigarette bent and crinkled in the ashtray. Ruth was pleased. She straightened out the half-smoked cigarette and set it in one of the ashtray grooves while she ate her breakfast. The waffles were stale but edible. The peanut butter and jelly were sweet and delicious. As she finished her sandwich, she became aware of voices coming from out front. Her townhouse was second from the last in her building. She could tell the voices were in front of her place. She lit the half cigarette and took a sip of coffee and listened. She couldn't hear exactly what was being said, but it sounded like a group of people, mostly men. Ruth finished her cigarette and went back in the house, taking care to lock the sliding glass door between the patio and kitchen, both at the handle and the floor. Ruth sat her mug and the crumpled paper towel on the counter. The voices were more distinct now, muffled some through the double-pane glass in the front. A man was speaking with a fairly raised voice, and she could now understand some of what he was saying. "They found him right here, and one of you fucks knows who did it." Ruth grabbed her cell phone and dug around in the contents of her purse on the floor for the business card. She found it. Before she dialed, she programmed the number in her cell phone. Thank goodness the blinds were closed. Ruth dialed the number, then crept to the window and peeked around the side of the blinds. It looked like one of the guys from yesterday and a bunch of other homeless people, mostly men. Someone answered on the other end of Ruth's phone. "This is Officer Victor Pearson. Are you safe?" Ruth whispered into the phone. "This is Ruth Dober. A dead homeless man was found on my stoop earlier this week, and now there's a mob of homeless people in front of my townhouse talking about it, and they're aggressive and yelling, and I'm afraid to leave." Ruth was shaking now. "Okay, Miss Dober, I have the address here. Someone will be there soon. Do you want to stay on the line?" Officer Pearson asked. "No, just get here soon. One is shaking my railing now," Ruth continued, whispering, and hung up. The man from yesterday was now smacking Ruth's window with the palm of his hand while he yelled at the crowd around him. "And she just let him lay here while she was comfortable in her house. And she's the reason they took me to jail yesterday, and Cliff had warrants in 2 other states, so he won't be coming back anytime soon either," he was saying now. Ruth watched as 2 officers approached from either side on foot toward the group of people assembled in front of her townhouse. It was Dan and Linda. Dan called out to the man pounding his palm on Ruth's window. "Hey, you there, stop pounding that window and get down on the ground, face first, hands behind your back." The group started to disperse. Linda managed to grab one of the few women who were among them. She wasn't in the best shape. She could hardly walk, let alone run like the others. Dan was now cuffing the guy who'd been pounding Ruth's window, and Linda was talking to the woman, who didn't look like she understood or could answer any questions. A police cruiser pulled up now. 2 male cops got out and took the guy on the ground in cuffs and put him in the back of the car. Linda was cuffing the woman, who looked like she was somewhere in outer space, and handing her to the other 2 cops as well. Now Dan was knocking on Ruth's door. Ruth, please come to the door." Ruth opened the door just as he was about to pound it again. He almost punched her in the chest, but he caught himself. "Hi," Ruth said. "You want to come in?" she said, moving to the side. Dan came in with Linda following. Ruth sat down on the couch. Her golden toenails sparkled up at her, taunting her. "Do you have someone you can stay with for a while until this blows over?" Dan was asking as Linda closed the door behind her. "I'm moving," Ruth said flatly. "Oh, I'm sorry it's come to that," Dan said, shaking his head. "It's not just this. It's a bunch of stuff. I can't stay here." Ruth sighed heavily and leaned back into the sleeper sofa she was still making payments on. She spoke again, looking off into nothing. "I'm going to have to sell almost everything. You want to buy a sleeper sofa, end tables, and coffee table, or maybe some home office furniture?" Ruth said blankly. Linda and Dan looked at her for a moment. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Linda finally asked. Ruth's head snapped back to meet Linda's gaze. "Nothing special. The day Mr. Morris came into my life, I had just quit my job. Now I can't pay my bills, and I have to move. I've got somewhere to go. I'm going to pick up the keys today. So you tell me, am I in trouble?" "Oh," was all Linda said. "The guy out there today will be held this time. We saw him trying to instigate aggression against you. He won't be released again," Dan said. "And that woman will probably end up at county psych," Linda said. Ruth just sighed and shrugged. "Whatever," Ruth said, sounding defeated. "Where are you moving?" Dan asked. "A farm out near Santa Cruz with some family." "I thought you said you don't speak to your family," Dan said suspiciously. "This is my chosen family, not my biological family. We're not really related," Ruth answered. "Oh, well, that sounds nice," Dan said, trying to sound encouraging. "Yeah, it is. Now I just have to pack and sell things and get it all moved over there. You have any free time this weekend?" she said jokingly to Dan and Linda. I wish we could help you, but we're the ones officially investigating this case, Dan said. I wasn't serious, Ruth replied. Dan looked a little hurt. Well, maybe I can call you when this is all settled then, Dan said hesitantly. Linda's eyes got huge and her nostrils flared. Thanks, but that's probably not a great idea. You probably just feel bad for me. You're not really interested in me. Have you ever dated an assault survivor? Probably not. We're not always the best company, and besides, you're not really my type. Again, Dan looked a little hurt, but this time Linda smiled and stifled a laugh. I'm sorry, Dan said to Ruth. It's okay. I'm flattered and you're cute. If I met you out at the bar, I'd have a drink with you, but this is just too much here. You're right. It is, Dan said. Are you okay now? He asked. Yes, I'm fine. I was just going to shower and then run some errands. I thought you were going to get your keys, Linda asked. I am, but not until after 3. I need to get some groceries. I don't even want to tell you what I just ate for breakfast. Okay, well, we can see ourselves out. Call again if you need to. We got Mr. Morris positively ID'd now. His sister just lives a couple blocks away at the overpass. He was a veteran. The details will be released tonight. He overdosed on fentanyl, probably partying with others, probably in that van. His sister said he's been using for a while now. Ruth felt sad for Greg now. He was a veteran. Oh, thanks for telling me. Dan and Linda left, and Ruth locked the door behind them. The street looked ordinary again, but Ruth didn't feel ordinary or like she belonged. She now felt like an intruder in her own townhouse on her street in San Jose. She gathered all the spilled items back into her purse and carried it upstairs to her bedroom. She sat the purse on her chair by the window and plugged in her phone to charge. It was almost dead. Then she undressed and got in the shower, allowing the hot water to just pour over her back and hunched shoulders. She soaked up, washed her body and hair, and got out into the steam-filled bathroom. She wrote her name in the steam gathered on the mirror, then dried herself and dressed. At the market, Ruth pushed one of the small double buggies up and down the aisles. She didn't want to fill the kitchen when she knew she was going to be packing, but she couldn't afford to keep eating out with Brian unless he started picking up the tab, which he just might start doing after their last conversation. Ruth didn't expect it, but she wouldn't be surprised either. She picked out 8 cans of low-sodium canned soup, 2 boxes of frozen breakfast burritos, 2 small frozen pizzas, 3 bottles of rosé, a wheel of brie, some crackers, a jar of nuts, orange juice, cream, coffee, a package of pads, toilet paper, and a bunch of bananas. That should get her through the next week or so. At the checkout, she wrestled with herself about whether or not to get another pack of cigarettes. She gave in and bought one, telling herself she was going to use it to replace the old emergency pack in the freezer. When she got home, the first thing Ruth did was find the cigarettes, wrap them in saran wrap, and put them in the freezer. She put one of the pizzas in the toaster oven. The pizzas she got were just personal sized, and they were covered with veggies. Brian didn't like anything on his pizza but cheese. She hated sharing pizza with him. Usually they got slices if they went to Nick's together, but the only veggie slice Nick had was mushroom. Waiting for a special order took forever, so when they went to Nick's, she settled for a mushroom slice and a green salad. After she ate her garden veggie pizza, Ruth picked up her grandmother's rocking chair and took it out back to the garage. Until the trip to the market, she hadn't driven her car in over a month. She hadn't realized how much she had missed driving the bright blue convertible with its snagged ivory ragtop. Everything in the garage was covered in dust, and there were cobwebs. She put the chair down in the grass just outside the garage and felt for the light switch. When she flipped it, she could see insects scramble in the corners. With her keys, she opened the back of the car. The chair was small enough she should be able to fit it in the back seat. It took some doing, but she got the chair in the car. Then she went back in the house and got her purse and the lamp on her nightstand. She went out the back, locking up behind her, and put the lamp on the front passenger seat, buckling it in for safety. Then Ruth tossed her purse on the passenger side floor, locked the back door of the garage, put her sunglasses on, and situated herself in the driver's seat of her beloved car. CDs were a new thing when this car was new, and it had an old CD player in the dash. Ruth looked through the CD file on her visor, found an L7 CD, and popped it in the dash. She pressed her garage door opener, and the old door rolled up. She pulled out into the back alley and waited until the garage door closed before punching the address in her phone's GPS. It was a little after 2, so she should be fine arriving after 3. Sydney would be back. She remembered telling Sydney she'd call, so she did and left a message. Then she pulled out of the alley. The drive was uneventful. The traffic was a little heavy, but nothing big. She got to the house at 3:40. Sydney was in the backyard playing frisbee with Buck. Brian's car was there, and Sydney was in the yard playing frisbee with Buck. Brian's car was there, and Brian was sitting on the wicker chair on the porch drinking a root beer. Ruth was a little disappointed. She hoped to get there before Brian and have some time to chat with Sydney alone. But there would be plenty of time for that in the future. Ruth got out of the car, leaving the chair and lamp. Her purse over her shoulder, she walked toward the porch. "Hi," Sydney was waving with one hand and held the frisbee in the other. Buck was sitting, staring at the frisbee. "Hi," Ruth waved. Brian ran over to hug Ruth. "We thought you got lost," he said. "No, just more fun at the house that took up my time." "What happened now?" Brian asked, right hand on his hip, root beer on the left. "One of those homeless guys came back with some other homeless people and was trying to get them to attack the townhouse with him. The cops had to come. They asked if I had somewhere to stay." Ruth told them both. "Oh my God," Sydney said. "You must have been terrified." "It wasn't fun." "So are you staying here tonight?" Brian asked. "No, but I have a couple things in the car. I didn't think to bring any clothes with me, or maybe I would stay. But it's probably better for me to go back in case they try to do anything else. I can call the cops." Brian started walking towards Ruth's car. "I'll bring your stuff in." Ruth unlocked the doors with her fob. "I just have the rocking chair and the lamp, Bri," Ruth said. "I'll carry those in for you." Brian finished his can of root beer, crumpled the can, and shoved it in one of the pockets of his cargo shorts. "Come on in. Let's have some tea, and I'll get you your key." Sydney wrapped her arm around Ruth's shoulder, and they walked to the porch like old friends. Ruth wouldn't be bringing a lot of stuff with her, but she certainly had a lot of baggage. They all did. So, relationships are a very important part of this novel, and relationships are a part of all novels, but in this novel in particular, relationships are an actual character. So seeing this dynamic grow between Ruth and Sydney is an important part of the storyline, and the differences between like Brian's relationship with his mom, Brian's relationship with Ruth, and Ruth's relationships with Brian's mom, and Ruth's relationship with other people. Ruth's a bit more of a grown-up. Brian has a stunted, he has an arrested development, right, because of the injury caused to him when he was 19. Right, there's a stunt in his emotional growth, and so his responses are very juvenile in a lot of situations here. But he's still a grown man, right? And so that's an important part of this storyline, and something that I was intentionally exploring. So, anyway, what's gonna happen next, huh? What's going to happen next? Guess you're going to have to wait and see.